At this point, we almost finished our discussion about the last section of this chapter, okay? Because we already figured out the crucial role the real interest rate plays, okay? No matter when we look at the markets for goods and services, or when we narrowly focus on the market for loanable funds, okay? We reach the same conclusion, all right? Probably the only thing we would like to add to our discussion is about the national saving curve, okay? Because when you check out my previous videos, you probably already realized that most of the time I show you the upward sloping saving curve, but when you check out the textbook, you would find that sometimes the authors use the vertical saving curve, right? Now, the difference here is about consumption, actually, okay? Not saving, but consumption. Is consumption not responsive to the changes in real interest rate? If your answer is no, you said that, when I spend my money, I don't care about interest rate. If that is the case, then the national saving curve should be vertical. Okay, so you already decide how much to spend regardless of the interest rate. Of course, your saving would be independent of interest rate, right? So you're gonna see a vertical saving curve, all right? But in reality, most economists and beliefs and also most evidence support the view that consumption actually depends upon the interest rate, and in some cases on some market it heavily depends upon the interest rate. For example, if you're taking a car loan, right, then you would find that the auto purchase heavily depends upon the interest rate. When the interest rate is high, people are less likely to take the loan, they're less likely to buy a car. Okay, so here of course we can based upon your assumption, we can revise our consumption function, either including the interest rate or not including it. Okay, and so that gives us the difference between the vertical saving and versus the upward sloping saving. Okay, of course, if it's responsive to the change in interest rate, it's going to be upward sloping. Okay, and another way you can look at this is the interest rate would be the opportunity cost, okay, or the return from your saving. So the higher the return, then the more you want to save. Okay. Alright, of course, under the two circumstances, we can compare the crowding out effect. Okay, I would leave that for you guys to, as a kind of an assignment to figure out after class. Okay, you go back and look at, what we discussed before about the crowding out effect, and see, with different consumption function, then how the crowding out effect is different. Okay, I believe in the numerical example I gave you on the worksheet, we already discussed that. Okay, and on the graph, the three-step analysis, you can do the same thing. Okay, but here, remember, the most important thing is the economic intuition. So when you explain the difference in the crowding out effect, with the vertical saving versus upward sloping saving, the most important intuition here is whether or not savers respond to interest rate. Okay, if they do, then how that would affect the crowding out effect. Like the effect becomes larger or smaller. Why? Okay. All right. Think about that. And if you have any questions, we can, talk further at our virtual meeting. Okay. And another thing you would be able to find in the book is a discussion about the change in investment. Okay, we said that on the loanable funds market there are two sides, saving and investment. Now, when we talk about the crowding out effect, it looks like we completely focus on the change in saving, right? That is true because we want to talk about spending hikes versus tax cuts, right? Which is one of the hottest topic in public arena. Okay, but of course, there could be any change happening on the demand side about the investment. Okay, so you guys can do that. I believe you can find some detailed discussion in the book. So I would leave that for you guys as a reading assignment. Okay, and once again here, when we talk about that, there could be two possible scenarios. One is a vertical saving, the other is the upward sloping saving. Okay, and you should be able to figure out the difference between these two when investment changes. All right, believe it or not, here it finally comes to the moment we can wrap up the whole chapter. Okay, and this is I would say it's probably the biggest. Yeah, I think it's the biggest chapter of the semester. Okay, and it's the first theoretical model we introduced, the neoclassical model. Okay, and we actually go through the whole circular flow diagram. Okay, starting from the market for goods and services, go through the firm's behavior, and look at the market for factors of production, and eventually through the household purchasing decision, we come back to the market for goods and services and find how it reaches its equilibrium, right? And that's through that happens through the change in the real interest rate, right? And we take an alternative way to talk about that crucial role of real interest rate in our economy by focusing on the financial market or the loanable funds market. Okay, and we pretty much reach the same conclusion. All right. Now, several points that we still want to make before we completely wrap up this chapter. The first thing we would like to say is this is a general equilibrium market model. Okay. Now, what does that mean? Now, let me go back here to the circular flow diagram. And in the introductory course, when we talk about the supply and demand, we narrowly focus on one market. For example, when we talk about the pizza market, right, or auto market, and we just look at like the pizza supply, pizza demand, auto supply, auto demand, right? We don't care about any other markets. Okay, we narrowly focus on one market and say, the price fluctuates, okay, goes ups and downs to help clear the market, right? If the market reaches its equilibrium, in that scenario, it's called partial equilibrium. In other words, we know that the market is clear, okay, but we don't know what's going to happen to other markets. Okay. However, here when we say the real interest rate clears the market for goods and services, we know for sure the market for factors of production has already been cleared, right? Because that's how we go step by step through this market and eventually come back here, right? So the general equilibrium means at that point, the equilibrium point, we know all the markets in this economy are clear. All the markets, not just one market. Okay, so all the market means auto market means potato market, pizza market, okay, and the market for Coke, okay, and all of these markets, and labor market, land market, these markets for factors of production. Okay. All right. So this is the general equilibrium model. This is the reason this chapter is really kind of very comprehensive. Okay. And we also would like to go back to our discussion about these assumptions we made at the beginning of the chapter, right? Back then, you probably remember we said that it sounds crazy, right? It sounds oversimplified with these assumptions. But later, when we draw the conclusions in theory, and then we check these conclusions with empirical evidence, we find that they're pretty consistent, okay, between the theory and the empirics. So that's why most economists would say these assumptions are acceptable, okay, at least from the empirical perspective or the evidence perspective. Of course, you can change these assumptions, okay. And for example, you would say that I want to look at the open economy, okay, what's going to happen. So you would introduce the exports and imports. That's totally fine, okay. And most of the time, you would find that the conclusions are not going to be fundamentally different, okay. It's just making the math or the graphs more complicated. All right. And the way ahead, we're gonna in the next chapter, next two chapters, we're gonna talk about unemployment. I'm sorry, we're going to talk about the national output, unemployment, and also we're going to look at the money, okay, the money market in the long run, right? And then after we finish our discussion about the long run, we would be able to step into the short run, okay, talking about the Keynesian economics, okay. But again, remember, the long run is always the most important thing, okay, because once we understand the trend, then the fluctuations should be relatively easier for us to comprehend. All right.